It's been about a little over 2 years in the making, and now it's finally come to fruition. So today they're going to do the debriefing, and I think in about, 2 to 3 months, they're going to give the final report on this. So this is an exciting time for Brisbane, and hope that you enjoy this.
Thank you, Mayor. It's nice to see a lot of you for a second time. Let's see. Okay, first I'm going to start out by introducing what is the Urban Land Institute, so you all know what we represent as an organization, and we'll give a little overview and then we'll go into the presentation. And I just ask that you kind of bear with us because we've been at this for 2 days, so it's a lot of material and it may seem a little rough, but we had to put it together quickly. We had to go, it's a steep learning curve. So the Urban Land Institute is an international organization that provides leadership and education mostly for the land development community, but a lot of others also belong to the organization. Again, we'll have more information about ULI itself in the briefing book. I don't want to spend, in the final report, I want to spend a lot of time on this. ULI has what they call a district council that's in San Francisco that really serves the San Francisco Bay Area and provides a lot of opportunity for sharing information and resources. And as you can see, this is a pretty senior group of people here. This is an activity that... Alan, good. My mother, every time I see my mother, she points out the gray hair. Thanks, Mom. Again, I'm trying to go through this relatively quickly, so I'm hoping you'll get the drift from looking at the slides, and you could read more about us as ULI. Now, the technical advisory panels are a very important service that the Urban Land Institute provides, and this is an opportunity for communities to reach out to ULI and ask some of these questions that are sort of percolating through the community, but it's maybe a series of issues that have either been too contentious to deal with internal to the community or too challenging or things that the community is just starting to think about or whatever. And I'm going to talk more about the process. So the process is that the community generally distills whatever issues they want addressed down into a series of 4 questions for the panel, and they prepare a briefing book. So your staff did that in conjunction with the ULI staff. They prepared a briefing book, and then the panelists, you see the staff are here, the panelists are here, I'll introduce everybody in a minute. The panelists then in 2 days or a day and a half, conduct a tour of the area, work with stakeholders. In this particular technical assistance, we met with almost 40 stakeholders, which is an exceptional number for a 2-day technical assistance. The Urban Land Institute often runs these 5-day advisory panels, and then you talk to 40, 50, 100 people. But to do a 2-day tap and squeeze in 40 people, it was worth it, I might add, but it's unusual. We consider the information, we put together a presentation, and then we produce a final report. So it's a very quick process, but it's a chance for us to give you kind of a quick reaction off the top of our head. So now, to introduce the panel, I'm Dina Belzer. I've been the chair, I've been the taskmaster, I've tried to herd this group of cats. So far, so good. They're all still here. Helen Bean. Helen is the Economic Development Director for the City of Emeryville. We're very fortunate to have Helen because she has a lot of experience, particularly with industrial communities that are transitioning into residential. So she's been a terrific asset. Next is Brian Canepa, sorry. Been a long day. Brian is a principal with Nelson Nygaard, and his firm, Brian is no exception, are really thought leaders in the field of alternative transportation, innovative transportation, and they often take incredibly creative solutions to transportation challenges. So again, we've been very fortunate to have Brian. Frank Fuller, who's a principal with Field Paoli, which is an architecture firm that's really known for doing very exciting and vibrant retail and commercial spaces. And Frank has worked on some of the best mixed-use projects in the region, to say nothing of around the country, right? Around the world? Country, okay. Mary Murtaugh, the president and CEO of Mercy Housing, EMA, EAH. See, I am tired. It has been a long couple of days, and I squeezed in a city council meeting in Belmont last night, so I've been on the go. So Mary is the president and CEO of EAH Housing, which is an affordable housing developer. I do know what you do. I just don't know the name of your organization. They're an affordable housing developer they're based in Marin County, but they work in 50 cities around California, 2 states, 50 cities, Hawaii and California. And this is the second or third time I've had the opportunity to work with Mary. Also, she's an incredibly creative thinker and has been a huge addition to our panel. She's an advocate for housing, but she's also an advocate for good planning and design. So it's been really a pleasure to have her. Elizabeth Shreve is a principal with SWA Group. And SWA is a world-renowned landscape architecture firm based in Sausalito. And Elizabeth and I have just had the privilege of working on another project together. And again, a very great thinker and leader, and you'll be able to see her beautiful drawings and diagrams in a minute. Corinne is at the end here. Corinne Stewart works for AECOM, which is a big global development services firm, and Corinne will be our report author. So she will not be presenting today, but she'll be capturing the dialogue back and forth, and she'll be then compiling all of this into the final report. And then last but not least is Alan Talansky, who's representing the developer and ULI expertise here. And Alan's been pulling together a mixed-use TOD, transit-oriented development project down in San Mateo. He moved to the Bay Area from Philadelphia in 2008, something like that, and has really moved in and made himself, I think, really a key asset to this community, to San Mateo County, and now to the region. So we're really, it was Philadelphia's loss and our gain. So I think it's important for you to know the kind of expertise you have sitting up here. So again, as I said earlier, we spoke to almost 40 of you stakeholders yesterday, and we got a lot of information from you that really informed our process. And really kept us thinking about the things that are essentially your concerns, your values, and this was really incredibly helpful. A sense of environmental stewardship, the desire for maintaining slow, steady growth, the quality of the community cohesion here is really strong. This is clearly a very special place physically, and it's created a special place in terms of the people, the ethos of the community, so we really tried to capture that. So in some cases, we heard things that are conflicting, and that shouldn't be surprising to you. Different people have different objectives. So we also heard that the business climate here is improving, but it's been notoriously unpredictable, for example. We heard that there also are some of the residents perceive the noise emissions and truck traffic from Crocker Park to be really, I think, bothersome is too mild a word. I think a nuisance, right? But on the other hand, some of the business interests feel that those concerns are maybe a little bit overstated. So it shouldn't be surprising to you, and I think we wanted to really recognize both themes of things that we heard. So I'm hoping that you're having a chance to glance through all these bullets, because I don't want to read through them all. Needless to say, we found that the quarry was a controversial subject, and mostly that people are opposed to residential development there. So we learned from you and tried to capture what we thought the community's vision was. And again, we're here for 2 days. We're not telling you something that you have to live with. We're just telling you what we heard and how we would synthesize what we heard into 6 points here. We know that you want to be economically resilient, that you want to be thriving and diverse as a business community. I think one of the city council people said warm, cozy, and comfortable. We liked that. Connected and walkable. People really talked about the value of the trails. A modern a model for environmental preservation and stewardship. We were also very struck by this is beyond the sort of rhetoric of sustainability, but this idea of stewardship was really powerful. And again, that people want to be considered open for business, that you do want business to be here. So with that, Mary's going to take it over and talk about what some of your challenges are.
Was out of the room when you started. Did you thank the city for all the hard work they've done already?
I did not. That would be very good.
A lot of thought and work has already gone into creating an economic development plan, pulling these panels together, putting together the TAP package. It's great. Thank you guys. Awesome. Okay, so with regards to challenges, the commercial property generates a significant, in fact, 42% of your tax base. So it's really essential that collectively a way is figured out to make sure that that stays healthy and resilient. It's predominantly business-to-business sales tax generation as opposed to sales to the general public. And there's also some issues with regard to tax that we think you might be able to tackle with regards to the state teachers' retirement properties. It's completely understandable that staff have been cut at the city responding to an all-but depression, the Great Recession. Cities have been under a lot of pressures and had to cut back staff. That makes complete sense. We think it's now time to retrench and look at what that may be costing you in terms of business opportunity to not have some key positions staffed. And there's one key challenge with regards to growth, which is that you guys have a reputation for being anti-business. There's a lack of investment in the city that's visible in seeing properties that are run down in some cases. You're in a flight path area for the FAA, and that's going to have some restrictions on some things you can build, including schools, believe it or not. There's potential flood impacts and some declines in the physical environment. Next slide, please. Oh, I used to have one of these. I love these kind of. So, a reality check. I think we heard universally how much people would like to have certain kinds of commercial development in the town. More restaurants. One of the council members mentioned, could we buy an aspirin somewhere? Or it was one of the gentlemen from the business park. You know, if you have a headache, you can't even find an aspirin for sale. And a number of other amenities. And as a practical matter, this is a town, one of the wonderful things about it is it has a small population. But one of the downsides of that is you need a bigger population to support commercial of this nature. So that just gives you what the estimated population is required for a Trader Joe's, a Safeway, or a pharmacy. So pharmacy looks like the most likely possibility. I'm aiming this at. Did that work? Okay, and then I'm turning this over to. I'm doing city questions? Okay. City questions.
You're doing it all, Mary.
No, I'm not. So the questions that we were asked as a panel to answer for you were as follows. What are the viable long-term land use and design options? Can Crocker Park be made more diverse and economically resilient through subdistricts? And what design considerations should be considered for planned mixed-use opportunity site, with a lot of other detail attached to that? And then also what land use options should be considered for the quarry. So we broke these down and rearranged them slightly for clarity so that we thought we could attack your questions more effectively and rephrase them as follows. And there's time for Q&A at the end, so if we've left something out, please let us know. And we can address it in the report too. But what are the viable long-term land use options for Crocker Park? And could it be made more diverse and economically resilient through subdistricts, including residential, for land use, marketing, business clusters? Secondly, what are the viable design options for Crocker Park and Brisbane Village? And thirdly, what land use options should be considered for the quarry property? Okay.
Talking about Crocker Park, land use options, what we're talking about is what's the future economic analysis of Crocker Park? and how do we get more out of it, and how do we make it work better with the community. Upgraded space might serve advanced R&D and biotech and just-in-time manufacturing or clean manufacturing that's coming back from China. That's a great possibility for this community. It's a perfect location for it. It's the type of area these people are looking for, and it's a lot more real estate value per square foot for the community, therefore a lot more tax value. Retail showrooms, building materials, home, food design, a portion of East Crocker Park to be converted into a mixed-use district and integrated with downtown, housing, retail, grocery, stores. This is something that the community wants, and it's something that can make the other part of the industrial park a lot stronger. Here's the mixed-use pattern, and we've added to it a little bit. The city outlined a portion of it, and we've added a little more to the mixed-use opportunity that we think might be available to the community. These are land use options. These are conversions of offices. This is a mixed-use option, not overbearing, but something that can be retail and both residential. This is what can happen to some of the warehouse space. A lot of warehouse spaces in communities have turned into small manufacturing sites and small showroom distribution sites. This is a project that I've worked on that took a warehouse and turned it into a tech office, a very high value tech office, where you would increase the square foot rental and bring in higher paid employees. What these things do, the lofts, the areas, the retail, it's all interrelated with the community, and it's interrelated with getting a better group of employees to be able to be technical employees and better paid employees. It gives some employees places to live, and it creates amenities both for the employees and the community. And the combination of some more residential, not a lot more, and the combination of a greater workforce will create the amenities to make the current retail in Brisbane stronger and bring more retail to Brisbane. And these are just some examples of what's been done in communities.
Thanks, Alan. So our second question then is, given the sort of array of land uses that you told us about and we thought about and brought to bear on the issue, how would those pan out in terms of design options? How would you design them? And so we have kind of three categories of design issues. One is open space and connectivity and landscape, which I'll speak to. The second is really about transportation and complete streets, which Brian will speak to. And then we know that the Brisbane kind of urban design and how that is configured, the Brisbane Village, and Frank will talk to that. So first of all, we know that the importance that your community has attaches to its relationship to its very, very special site. A lot of sensitivity to the biodiversity of the area, the topography of the area, your proximity to San Bruno, the county and state parklands. That's a really unique attribute. And yet, at the same time, there's certain challenges. So here you are in this really quite remarkable valley that's a sort of hidden little Shangri-La, and you can't help but be struck by the topography and the unique characteristics, relationship to shoreline, and the relationship to the hillsides. And essentially you're in a kind of bowl, and the pieces of the community at this point, though they're very much defined by that valley, they are somewhat disconnected. So you have visitation, which is your sort of main street. You have the long linear form of Crocker Park. You have the residential communities that are somewhat disconnected. And then you have the Caltrain line and the transit services that run north-south to the east side. So what you have right now is a sort of disconnect. And this disconnect came through quite a bit in our discussions with your stakeholders. Not only a physical disconnect of the Ridge people versus central Brisbane, that's a physical disconnect, but there's also a kind of a social and psychological and almost kind of emotional disconnect. And people talked about that a lot, about how they felt that this community was somewhat siloed. And so what we do have as connective pieces we have that wonderful kind of rail to trail conversion that loops around. But it's partially used, but not maybe used as fully as possible. So how do we help to create some more connections? It seems to us that because of the long east-west form of the Crocker Park, we could look for some opportunities for north-south connections, really creating more opportunities for people to connect by foot and to go through the park and connect north-south, and then to have a destination that everyone holds in common kind of down here at the entrance to the community. So to do that, a number of interventions and goals and kind of a vision for landscape and open space. Improved trail system, maybe more lighting, paving, signage, maybe some public art moments along the way. As new development is phased in, are there ways to create pedestrian walkways through that development? Doesn't need to be more streets, but it could be pedestrian promenades. The quality of your civic space where people gather, and you have farmers markets already. You have actually really wonderful community spaces now. And how do you build on that as you start to redevelop your Brisbane village? Streets, of course, are the biggest public space we have, and so you want to really look at streets as multifunctional spaces that incorporate water quality, stormwater systems, as well as landscape, pedestrian amenities, and then areas for congregating where people can gather and share and eat. These are goals for the sort of the level of quality and always incorporating sustainability into that landscape infrastructure, treating stormwater through green roofs and through the street and infrastructure system. And with that, I'll hand it over to Brian.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Again, Brian Camp. I'll be talking about the transportation kind of focused aspects of this. And I'll kind of start with this introductory slide and talk about essentially what we're trying to achieve here, and what we heard from quite a few people is a desire to achieve a more of a complete streets approach to transportation in the area. And what that means is being able to get around town and not necessarily have to be able to use your car in order to do so. You can still use a car, obviously, for many different trips, but are there ways we can change the street design and environment so that you can comfortably and safely walk, you can safely bike, you can potentially get to transit, whether that be public transit or shuttles, etc. And also, how can we do this in such a way that in order to maintain access to Caltrain or shuttles or things like that, how do you make that transit oriented rather than simply transit adjacent? So, for example, if you look at a lot of examples of developments down in Santa Clara County, they said, "Oh, great, we've plunked down a lot of residential next to a light rail line. Everyone will take light rail." Although we've produced no paths to get there, no bicycle paths, we've provided lots of parking for people to use their own cars. And why would people bother to use a train then? So those are the sorts of things we try to address here. And as you can see from here, this is just a sample diagram just showing many different modes, but they're all more or less accommodated equally. You have bike paths, you have transit, you have good walkable pavement, and you have plenty of access for private cars as well. And in sorts of areas like this is actually downtown Livermore, you can see that places can be easily adapted to be not only inviting for people, but also to be economically successful and safe for people who are accessing. So this environment, you can imagine no one's going to go roaring through there at 50 miles an hour. They're going to take their time. They're going to shop. They're going to see what it's like. And it's also, as a pedestrian there, you don't feel threatened at any given point. Also looking at sidewalks and pedestrian facilities in the area, a lot of times you want to be able to create quality environment for people to use. You don't want to just simply put down the bare minimum a lot of times, so 5-foot sidewalks. that might work in an extremely rural setting where there are very few people there. But if you actually really want to get people to walk, you have to design the sidewalks to be high quality and also in a really pleasant environment. And you can design streets in this way. There's nothing extraordinary about this diagram. It's, you have parking, you have a bike lane, you have some vehicle lanes, and you got a lot of trees. But it's really inviting. And you'll never see, again, highway speed traffic moving through this sort of area. So it's about creating the neighborhoods and residential areas as well. And really, to be fully multimodal, you also have to think of kind of all the different pieces of it. So not just how you get around, but in terms of the facilities themselves. So is there adequate bicycle parking for both people who are, let's say, visiting a business or employees of a business? And you always can make it look kind of nifty in its own ways. Some of my biking friends would probably say that these are impractical, but at least they're very popular. People can notice them right away. And they also serve as kind of a piece of public art. And then in terms of transit, to actually, again, make it an experience worth participating in. No one would drive a car if it was a Flintstones-like car, and people don't like taking dirty buses. So these sorts of environments are what people really seek out at the end of the day. And they can really, again, take all different shapes and forms. And you actually can, people get really creative with it on the artistic aspect of it, and it can serve a whole host of users. So it's going to be really important as part of this plan to create not only important facilities within Crocker Park, but also really good connections to Caltrain, to the shuttles. And lastly, we took a look. One of the things that we had heard from folks was that Valley Drive in particular really acted as a very strong barrier in the community, being able to cross that. And it's not surprising. It's a lot of heavy truck traffic moving at very high speeds across a very wide road. And so we took a look at, what could this road, how could it look different given the amounts of traffic there? And so you can see on top what it currently is, and I apologize that the type is very small on the feet, but this is actually all to scale. And so transforming that street into potentially something with a small median, including bike lanes and parking, to something that maybe doesn't even have a median, and you actually can maybe even expand the sidewalks and do some really creative things. So thinking just very broadly about, you have a certain amount of what we call right-of-way space, how can you use that space to really make it comfortable and quality for all users?
Thank you, Brian. So what I'm going to do now is take us through the third part of the design. And as you can imagine, in 2 days, after we've talked to everybody, we get together, all the designers get together, and then the economists get together, and we push and pull a lot, as you do in a community. The difference is we only have a few hours. So what we're going to do is show you now, just briefly, how we address two parts of that question you gave us: town entry and a revitalized mixed-use zone at the Brisbane Village. So what became really apparent as we started showing in the earlier diagrams was that when you look at visitation, and if you extended it so you take from County Road and keep going, you actually have a way to connect where Valley comes in, where visitation goes through, in a way that really makes a mixed-use area and an access which goes up to the railroad, or perhaps a bus station first and then a railroad station, and then that can connect to a mixed-use area, which then connects with the Crocker Park. And then if you look at that from the air, you can see the different parts of that you're trying to connect. For instance, if you look right here at visitation and how it lines right up here, actually you can miss the lift station. You can actually use city property. It actually can be done quite easily, and a way to try to connect a lot of the pieces, which currently you can't, at least I couldn't on first visit, understand the relationships between them. And so if you look at a crude diagram of this, here's visitation going up to the transit area along the railroad, and then you have a potential of looking at the village, where the retail shopping center is now, and imagining that you actually can combine maybe a few of those parcels and look at a mixed-use development as well as on the other side, so that you might get on the right side of visitation more of a retail mixed use, and on the left side more of a civic mixed use, where City Hall is and where the post office is and other facilities which could come in the future. and a more of a civic area mixed with mixed use. So now what happens is, if you do that, if you take this idea of going up to the station, you can see where the community park becomes actually a center of what could be a retail district. An example of this, by the way, is up in Healdsburg. If you go to Healdsburg Park, that Central Park, you have sort of shops around, there's a nice small hotel on one side. Because you could see across Community Park and crisscross it, and then you can see ways that you can come in from Bayshore, and you can actually make a mixed-use zone in here, which has nice frontage on the park and servicing in the middle. And you could actually make all those streets nice, tight, comfortable streets. And on the other side of visitation, over here more on the civic side, you could actually have a smaller block pattern where you have housing or offices converted from the warehouses. And on the bottom there, you see a drawing that, you know, is 2, 3, maybe 4 stories, and play with what that height could be, and a very nice village scale. So with the entries, you can imagine how coming into a park can have a monument-type entry, and the entry itself might be framed a lot by the building and the landscaping. And then you can imagine when you come into that park and you have places to sit, place to wander, retail on the bottom, some residential above. You have a streetscape where there's a lot of landscaping, easy parking, ways to cross the street at many places, place to sit. This happens to be a Whole Foods store. I know we talked about that. Now, there might need to be a little more population, as we talked about earlier, but place to sit like this, regardless of whether it's a Whole Foods, for restaurants and other things that can be supported in the village is certainly possible. And streets that are wide, so that you could actually sit in the street and have a carefully controlled traffic, and even farmers market certain days. So the idea that certain streets at certain times could be closed for events is another way of making the village very active and livable. This is this kind of scale. Couple stories maybe above, nice tall shops. So now I'm going to turn it over to Alan.
I got the quarry. And the quarry is a quandary or a quagmire, but it's a little high to be a quagmire, but it really is a sticky one. People feel very strongly about it. The issue with the quarry is the property isn't in Brisbane city limits, even though it's part of the scale of Brisbane. It's in the middle of the park. It's in the middle of the mountains. There's a value in the quarry. It's operating. Aggregate's getting more expensive. What it does pays more, which means it's more valuable. So it's not going out of business anytime soon, and I doubt if the people that own it and have lent money on it are about to just walk away and go away. That's a quandary. We have to look at options for that area that are economically viable. And there's a lot of different options. Right now, it has no infrastructure to serve development. So it's going to be very expensive to develop the quarry. And again, it's in the city sphere of influence, but it's operated by the county. We looked at 2 possibilities. And one possibility is that the city raise enough money to buy the quarry, and that would be expensive. The other thing is for a citizens council to come together, a group within the city, Citizens Action Committee, to come together and work out a development plan that they feel the people at the quarry might accept so that we can develop something that works within the city. I think they're not going to get anything approved like has been asked for in the past. The first plan that I saw was a little crazy. It took a neighborhood from Tracy and plopped it down in the middle of the quarry. It made no sense. I understand why people were upset. But again, we have to look at the reality. And the reality is it has a private owner. It's not within Brisbane legally. So if Brisbane wants to make something happen with a quarry, they have to take 1 or 2 paths. They have to be able to buy it. And if they're not going to buy it, They have to have a community-based discussion leading to an approach. I was supposed to turn the slide. Okay? So what we want is we want an outcome that represents the environmental needs of the community and an outcome that works for the people that own the quarry, who are a private interest. And I think this can be done with reason. It's going to be difficult, but it can be done. The community just has to look at it realistically. Helen, it's you.
So when we met with you all, one of the main messages we heard is that you wanted to have kind of a path forward, an implementation plan of where to go. And so taking all these great plans that you've heard so far, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Where do I point this?
It's this one.
So this slide summarizes the implementation objectives that we're shooting for here. The first one is to create community census around growth. It's clear from talking to you that there's been a lot of divisiveness in the community about the direction to go with growth, and a consensus around that is really important to move forward. And so what you're going to see in some of the implementation plans we have here are a way to get there. Another implementation objective is the new entrance to the city, and you've seen the plans of that of the mixed-use district. And that would also create more rooftops, which will support the services that you're looking for. Now, moving just to the business park itself, the objective is to create more amenities that will strengthen that business park and create an identity for it. And then at the same time, we need to address land use conflicts between residents and businesses. And again, we need to go through the process of the quarry. So we divided this into three parts: short term, medium term, and long term. The short term is based on clarifying the development approval process to really send a strong message that Brisbane is open for business. And that'll make a huge difference in just what you see in terms of overall investment activity. The next is to create more community cohesion, to build partnerships that bring the community together. And we've thought of these different areas. You've already started working in them. The arts, environmental stewardship would be good places to go. And then to look at Crocker Park, to really think of it as a unified business park, and to bring the property owners together to work on how to really improve the amenities, signage, landscaping, cleaning up the park as much as possible, to have a group that meets on a regular basis to work on those problems as a unified entity. So now going to midterm. We have this mixed-use zone is an important midterm goal, and implementation goal, because it's going to put in the land use requirements you need to create the plans you've seen. These bullets here explain different elements of that zone, which will be explained in a lot more detail in the document that you receive. And then getting back to the consensus around growth. I think a really good way to do that is through a general plan update. That is a long process. It takes a little money to do, but it gives you the framework for getting together and really talking about where you are now and where you want to go. You could focus on all of these issues, the land use conflicts between housing and industry, integrating environmental stewardship with economic development, and looking at how the decisions you make in land use affect general fund revenues. And also you would do a program EIR on your general plan update, which would provide a basis for future development and actually facilitate the development you want to see happen in the town. And lastly, it's to start the community visioning process for the quarry. It's something that needs to happen in order to work together to really decide where you want to go, so you get a solution there that really works for you. And that's really summarizes our implementation recommendations. So thank you, and if you have any questions for us, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Helen. I realized as I sat down, I didn't acknowledge the staff and thank them, and I didn't acknowledge the ULI staff. We have Dana Van Gelder, Elliot Stein, and Will, whose last name, Hayward. It's been a long day. Okay, with that, questions, comments, feedback. We're here to respond, to elucidate. Yes, sir.
Can you give us an idea of the 40 stakeholders who they kind of represented? I mean, who were the 40?
Who were the 40? I think that'll be in the briefing book, but it just in general it represented the city council. We spoke to the entire city council, planning commission, street commission, Complete Streets, the Moms of Brisbane, people who represented the interest for the San Bruno Mountain Watch, Chamber of Commerce, several business owners who own businesses in the park, school district, property owners, brokers, the quarry owners. So we hope that is a pretty good cross-section. Homeowners associations, yeah. 2 homeowners associations, long-term residents, right? Newer residents. Other questions? That was an easy one. Yes, Councilman.
Well, thank you, first of all, for putting on this presentation. Lots of great information and looking forward to the report. In the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the numbers that would be required for certain types of amenities like pharmacy, Trader Joe's, things of that nature. And when you look at the population numbers, are you looking at just the number of residents, and how would you take into account the fact that we have a large business population? Our population surges during the daytime, and would businesses potentially interested in coming into town look at that as well?
Right. I'm going to repeat your question for the recording, and then I'm going to ask Alan if maybe you want to answer that. The question is, when retail businesses are considering a site for location, do they only consider the residential population, or how do they treat the daytime population as well? Alan?
While you have a lot of people passing by and you have a lot of people that live in the area, Brisbane is at the foot of the mountains. And Brisbane being at the foot of the mountains for the retail community, I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, they look at it and they make a judgment and they say, well, people aren't going to be going through Brisbane. They're going to have to come and they're going to have to go. So they have to go through a lot of steps to get here, and they can't go over the hill from Brisbane easily. It's just not done. So they look at their marketing radius, and a retailer is very cold and hard about it. They look at rooftops. They generally don't look at daytime employees, even though they can be attracted downtown. And it can work. It can't work for the scale of the business that we'd like to have here. But there's another scale of businesses that is perfect for here. And you see them in towns. You see them in Palo Alto. You see them in San Mateo. You see them in other towns, the small grocers, the small people that provide those things. If we give a tiny bit more population, not a lot, and we make the town more inviting for them and give them a better shopping area, we'll attract those people. It's going to be very tough to get retailers to come that far. That was, I don't know if you know the where Target is in Foster City or in San Mateo now. Do you know where that Target is? They built a mall there, and the mall died. And the mall died because there was a bridge behind it. There was nowhere to go from there. So even though you had a lot of traffic, you had a lot of community around, the big guys just aren't going to come to this community that easily. We might get a good drugstore with a little more population, with some more amenities, with some more workers that make a little more money. Okay? But looking at it realistically, we don't want to paint any just pretty pictures.
And did you say they look at the residential population just in Brisbane or within a certain radius?
They'll look in a radius, but the radius isn't going to go on the other side of 101 because they see it as a natural barrier. The radius is going to be on this side. It's the way they look at things. That's why if you look at Coma, there's a target up on the hill and there's a target on this side of the highway. And that's why they did 2 targets, because they saw the highway as a natural barrier. And the barrier might not be logical, but it's a natural barrier. Now, if you have a destination, let's say your town wanted to support pottery, and you had beautiful pottery, and it would be somewhere where people would go to buy pottery. It's different. But they're not going to come just to buy food because they don't want to cross the line to do that. It's just, and that's what the retailers look at. Okay?
You had your hand. There was somebody back here. Yes, sir. You had your hand up, and then we'll get. Yes, sir.
On the easing of the permit process, you know, that's a question a lot of people are asking.
Could we capture that on the microphone?
I'm going to. I will repeat the question. Yes, sir. Or should we just? You can. Maybe I'll just hand you. Let me do that.
On the okay, on the easing of the permit process for the future of the city of Brisbane, is that a consideration at this point to move forward along with the, you know, ideas of increasing population of Brisbane?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by easing of the permit process. It's really more how quickly a permit is approved.
Lowering the standards somewhat.
Well, I don't think that would be in the interest of the city to lower the standards. But what helps is that if the city works with applicants to make sure they understand what the requirements are and help them through the process. And Brisbane, like Emeryville, is an older city. It has older buildings in it that it's difficult to meet a lot of the new building code requirements in older buildings. And so it should be just sort of understood that property owners have a certain burden just built in. And so when the city can appreciate that and can work with property owners to explain different steps, work with them, be problem solving, you know, instead of more regulatory, that is just helps. And it sends a message that we're partners, we're trying to get things done here, we're not trying to stop things. But it doesn't change the standards. The standards are important.
I want to really underscore that point, that the standards are what creates quality, and people are drawn to quality. So the idea is to help people understand why they have to do the quality and then help them get through it, rather than drag your feet, try to slow the process down. Often what happens is the more you slow things down, the lower the quality you get, because it costs the developers money, and so they know that they're not going to spend a lot of money if they have to spend a lot of time. So that, I think, is the point we're trying to make. Yes, ma'am. Carolyn.
I'm looking at a community that has 2 major hills, and I cannot envision how bikes would be that feasible as a mode of transportation in this particular town, because first of all, there's just the hills are very steep. And so what kind of alternative to cars could be proposed in this area? Has anyone really set up communities like this?
I think this one's for Brian, the transportation guy.
Thank you. It's a good question, and a lot of times being able to get people out of their cars in a place with real steep topography can be really tricky. So I'll address kind of the first point you made first, which is about bicycles. So if you're going to be implementing some sort of bike program here, even with, let's say it's a bike sharing program, do folks know what I mean by bike sharing? So you have particular, pods of bikes that everyone can use. That sort of thing is going to be most effective within Crocker Park. That sort of place, it's relatively flat. You have employees who could potentially use them. Now, a lot of cities have been upgrading their municipal codes to include better requirements for bike parking for employees and for visitors. But you also can include bike sharing pods. So, for example, employees who are at one end of Crocker Park don't all get in their cars during lunch and drive to get lunch down at the shopping center, village park. So that's really, in terms of bicycle use, you're probably going to get the most bang for your buck that way. As a side note, you can do bike sharing, another bike with hills. So, for example, there's bike sharing in the city of San Francisco. And what they do is, you'll notice that a lot of the bikes, and this is the same around the world, a lot of the bikes start out at the top of the hills at night, and they end up at the bottom of the hills by the end of the day. And so they get vans and bring them back up. So that's how they solve that issue. And I wouldn't say that's here. This is those are for major cities that do that. But that said, I think in order to really create the connections that we heard that people want, it's about the biking. It's about really good walking and trail access that's not only well connected, but that feels very safe. So we have been talking to folks about some of the old rail trail that ran behind the buildings. People said, you know what, this is a nice trail. No, I just don't feel safe here. It's the back of the building that's facing that. I don't want to walk through by that at night. And it's not to say that you'll get everyone walking those trails, but you really want to be able to improve the quality of that, both on the trail experience and when you're walking in front of stores. There was actually a whole science behind people not wanting to walk in front of, let's say, a warehouse that extends for 1,000 feet. That's not a pleasant experience. And I guess the last piece of it in terms of, transit and shuttles and things of that sort, a lot of folks say, yeah, we'll do a shuttle program and that's going to solve everything. But the problem is, shuttles are pretty expensive. You get a private contractor on these things who's, union or not, you're in the realm of about 80 to about $120 a service hour. Adds up very quickly. So in terms of moving people to and from here, I think we talked about that, and that'd be really more of a peak hour service. So getting employees to and from work that way and offering incentives to do so. So, for example, here in San Mateo County, there's a lot of businesses now that are mandated to have businesses get Caltrain passes and transit passes for their employees so that they're induced to take transit rather than driving to work.
Thank you. Okay, now.
As Carolyn pointed out, the land's not flat. But some of the things that I saw a challenge with was reconfiguring the entrance to Brisbane. And what you put on the map was actually the original entrance to Brisbane, long before I was born. And I'm not sure why that was abandoned for Old County Road instead. But there again, I wonder about traffic flow, because in the diagram, if you went out that way, you got to Bay Shore, well, then you'd have to tear down the firehouse to keep going to the railroad tracks. And does that encompass building a new bridge over the railroad tracks? And then the other part of the diagram showed where San Francisco Street got extended to the intersection that's Old County Road now. But San Francisco Street goes up. What are you going to bring it back down? So there were issues there that I saw logistically that I'm not seeing how it's going to work now compared to.
Got it. I think this is for Frank.
So as you know, this is trying to make a lot of assumptions, looking quickly and doing a sketch. Yes. So I'm sure there are lots of things wrong with this diagram, but let me explain what we're trying to do. First of all, actually the fire station is right. It's that little building. Oops, I'm not going to be able to point to it. Anyhow, it's a little building down off of the axis. They actually missed the fire station. Here. So that's the fire station. You get up. And here you get into a big parking lot, something with a nice bus terminal, bus turnaround. That's the idea, which is near the railroad. So hopefully, with some convincing and lobbying and whatever it takes, get the Caltrain to stop there. even if they're the bus, then we configured this so that you could actually make as good a pedestrian crossing as you can with signalization that Brian talked with us about as we looked at that. Down here, what we're doing is actually the slope is here, and when this comes in, we came around the slope. The slope is right in here. So we tried to connect so that San Francisco becomes one street with county, so that we could make county, the old county road, a very much smaller street, like the streets that go around Hillsborough Square, 2 lanes, diagonal parking, wide sidewalks, so that if you have a retail frontage, it's very comfortable for everybody.
Speak into the mic.
Oh, into the mic, sorry. So that you actually make Old County a different kind of street. Therefore, the frontages on these 2 sides become very much more pedestrian-friendly and retail-friendly. Finally, maybe another point is this piece is actually not a through street right there, because it would interfere with the truck traffic and all the traffic coming in to here. So that becomes emergency vehicles, bikes, pedestrians. So it can be opened. It could be open for events. It could be open if a fire truck needs to get through. But for day-to-day, it would not be. So it's trying to be a way to recognize this continuation of visitation and a way to make everything around Community Park more pedestrian-oriented and able to be good shopping with a couple of levels of office or housing above. And then also to allow the roads to come in both for Valley and for San Francisco. What was that? Yes, and then what you are allowing here with a possible combination of these parcels is an entrance here. This already exists to get to the lift station, which is right there. This misses the lift station. And then here, a new entrance off of Bayshore halfway between these 2, which allows this to be more successful because there's more access.
And this would be tearing down the current village.
Yeah, now, we did talk to the landowner who owns the buildings right behind here. There's a vacant lot behind the village center and then another building. And then there's the lift station and that area, and this sort of works with the fact that that would all be combined. Is this possible? I don't know. That's why we're only for 2 days and give you ideas. And you say, well, that's a crazy idea. Or, maybe that would work. So this is one version, one way of looking at how you might tie together a new mixed-use village center kind of ideas.
I want to underscore the fact that any of these diagrams would have to be worked out with private property owners. There's no taking of anybody's property. There's no buying of anybody's property. There's no condemnation. There's no eminent domain. This is, again, a plan. This is a concept. The city could work to facilitate and to encourage and to perhaps step up as a partner and fund some of the street construction or something like that. But I want to be very clear about that.
Yeah, being involved in real estate, we have to realize that anything you do, you have to make it economically viable for the owner. And that's what we mean here is if the mixed-use zoning is more valuable than the other zoning, then it encourages owners to make the property available. And eventually it happens if the zoning is there and there's enough people there. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not a tomorrow thing. It's a thing that's incremental and takes time.
Thank you. Next question. I'm going to go to this gentleman back here, and then we'll come back.
The quarry is in the county, and Brisbane is the city. What are some of the practical difficulties that you have, any of you have encountered in that particular situation, and what would make it more difficult?
Anybody? I mean, I think that I'll start with my understanding, which is that the quarry is in the county, but it's considered in the city's sphere of influence. So what that means is that the city has land use, and the county can't make an agreement with the quarry and cut the city out. The city needs to be involved. Now, the city would agree to annex the quarry in because the quarry needs the city's services, right? So that's kind of the quid pro quo there. So I think that being in the county is not necessarily the biggest challenge. That you have the jurisdictional issue is not necessarily the biggest challenge you have. Really, the issue of what should be done with the quarry itself, given how isolated it is, given all the issues with the development, given the environmental constraints. I think those are the bigger challenges. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything. Okay, Carolyn, and then we'll get to you, Councilman.
At the very beginning of the presentation, there was a reference to the Retired Teachers Association as a tax base. Is that something worth talking about today?
I realized that was a little obscure. So if you look at this ownership map of the Crocker Industrial Park, all of the parcels that are in this green shade are owned by the State Teachers Retirement Fund. So they're all owned by one institutional investor who is considered a not-for-profit, so they don't pay property taxes in the same way that a private property owner does. Now, the tenants pay what's called a possessory use tax, so they pay sort of an in lieu fee. But if those buildings are vacant, there's no quote-unquote property tax revenue that comes in. So the city's property tax is more volatile than it might be if there were a different kind of owner there. That's the issue. I realize that we have been talking to ourselves a lot about that, so we understood clearly what that meant. Now, there are several challenges that are associated with that ownership entity, but that's the tax issue, as I understand it. If I got that wrong, let us know. But that's basically the challenge. So, and when we looked at the city's general fund revenue, so there are two primary sources of revenue for the city: property taxes and sales tax. And by the way, you get a really significant amount of sales tax from your business tenants. You don't have a shopping center or anything like that, but you still have a significant increment of sales tax. But the amount, the percent of property tax versus sales tax revenues that you have in any given year is actually really tied to whether or not you have tenants in those buildings, because they're huge property owners. So I was looking at data for 2009, and then we saw some more current information. It's pretty variable, which is unusual for a city like this. So that property tax would be variable, but that's why. That's a really long, geeky answer. This is a fascinating topic to me, but that's why when Helen was talking about doing the general plan update and helping people to really understand how the city's fiscal health is tied to property and development and land use, this is really a key issue. And I think from my experience working actually around the country on this very topic, this is a subject that most communities are not at all aware of. And so the fact that this city has already begun to daylight this issue through your economic development strategy shows that your staff, at least, is already thinking about this. So it's a good thing. But I think when there needs to be a broader dialogue with the community around development, around the future, around all the implications, and this subject needs to be brought forward so people really understand the financial implications of certain decisions. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Councilman.
First of all, just thank you so much for partaking in our economic development journey. I know all of you are volunteering your time to do this, and we really appreciate it. A few years ago, I don't know, maybe about 7-8 years ago, we did do a public workshop, playmaking event, and one of the disappointing things of that process was that we really didn't have a clear implementation process to take that information. We got a lot of great public input, but It wasn't that second step. And I know that you guys have talked about short term, midterm, long term, and I know all of you care about the work that you do, and that you want to see this input that you give.
We're not volunteering.
No, not that. But I know what you'd like to see, though, is some action, right? You want to see some fruit come from your efforts. And so I'm just kind of emphasizing the importance of really having some clear implementation guidelines for us at the end of your document, so that when we all get together as a community, we have some guidance.
Okay, well, first of all, don't play on our heartstrings, because we're all suckers for places like this. So, yeah, but it's true. But I do want to say that in terms of implementation, I think that people tend to really underestimate the value of things like doing a good job with a rezoning, for example. So while it may seem to you that we've given you some very general implementation strategies and it wasn't quite what you were expecting, I also would like to really say take heed of our words, because they do really represent a lot of value and incentive for the community. So I think that's a point I would really like to underscore. I don't know if any of you... Let me give Helen a chance.
Well, a lot of the implementation recommendations focused around working together and forming community consensus, forming strong partnerships with the private sector and the residents. And from our sense of talking to you and the stakeholders groups is that, and we discussed it in the presentation, that there's a lot of divisions. There's physical divisions in the community, but also there's social divisions and who moves in when, and so anything that's can be established to try and heal that is really important. And it's fairly short term, because to set up groups, committees that has stakeholders, some of the people we met today, to work together to come to a common solution to problems. It has a lot of impact in the long range, in that you're building a really strong community consensus about where you want to go. So it might sound sort of soft, but it really matters. And for instance, in Emeryville, we have like 20 citizen committees. I mean, Emeryville is a town of 10,000 people, right? And we have a citizens committee for almost everything. And when I first started working for the city of Emeryville, I couldn't believe it. But it really is helpful that, because the citizens and the businesses get in there and work together and understand the problems and understand the background of the problems and understand the physical implications of decisions. And so there's a general capacity building in the whole city that really pays off.
I'll let you do that. Just let me say, one of the things, I'll give you an example. Instead of coming in with new zoning and saying that's the new zoning and your conditional use permit on everything else, you work a lot better with the business and landowners if you say it's an overlay. When it's economically feasible, we'll change zoning. This is our new zoning, but you're grandfathered in the long term, not the short term. And when it's economically feasible, then you can make the change. They're going to fight you every step of the way if you do it the other way, or they're going to feel bad about it, and they're not going to really join the team. That's one of the issues you come to. The other quick issue you come to, for instance, when I'm doing a new project as a developer, the first thing I do is go to the neighborhood, and I talk to the neighbors. And I say, what do you want? What do you need? And I don't get them all going with me. Some of them don't even want to talk to me, even though at least here they give you wine, okay? But that's such an important thing, is that entry level. When they're in the beginning of the planning, rather than you say, well, this is the fact, it means a lot, and you build a good program that way. And Mary wanted to say something.
I just wanted to mention that I hope what we're we've written down doesn't seem like glittering generalities. We will provide some additional specifics in the written report, but there's a limit to how far you can go in the amount of time that we've had available to us. And some of this is very complex, and your staff has tackled the beginning of some pieces of it. But as a practical matter, I think the town probably should consider retaining someone who has expertise in zoning. I'm not volunteering. I don't know anything about that, but except for my own limited development range, but wouldn't know where to start advising you. But to get people who really can give you expertise about that and help you set up a detailed process.
And you do have a lot of expertise already here.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Let me get back to you with the mic.
Quickie question for Alan. You spoke of the quarry quandary, and earlier we heard that the residents are really opposed to any development there. What are their primary objections to developing the quarry?
I would say one of the primary objections for most of the people I talk to is it's a very sensitive environment. And yes, it's been a quarry for a long time. And in their perfect world, they like it returned to the way it was before it was a quarry. And, you get a lot of that. I can get an old shopping center and everyone would like it to be what it was 50 years ago before I took over the shopping center. That's why there has to be a balance. What you have to do is work with the community, or what the quarry people have to do is work with the community to find out what works for the community, because you're not going to be able to cram something down their throat. And that's in working together. And that's why we suggested the community getting out front of the subject. That's one thing. The other thing is are they going to put 1,800 people up there and a lot of traffic going to come down the road? How much noise is there going to be? What's it going to do to our resources? What's going to be the demand on the community? How is it going to affect our voting balances? All those things come into it.
I think safety was another issue that we heard. Can the benches be stabilized so they don't collapse? And then there's an issue with one road in, one road out. What if there's an earthquake? What if there's a significant fire? I'm sure you can fill in the blanks. Okay. Yes, sir.
Sticking with the quarry as a popular topic, is the panel going to make a recommendation as far as this is the zoning we see best suited, like you did for the village areas of mixed use? Or are you going to leave it to a consensus panel and go with that?
We're gonna. I think we didn't really think it was a good location for a business park. It's just really too far from any place, and so not a good business location. So then, what does that really leave as housing? We talked about housing, or maybe a conference center with an interpretive center. I don't think there are a lot of options really for what would work up there. And so then it's really a matter of whether or not one could come up with a site plan that could meet the economic return for the developer and would also be acceptable to the community while addressing all the infrastructure challenges, sewer, water, electricity. I don't think there's really very much of anything up there. And then the safety issue of retaining the walls and so forth and so on. So I think there are a lot of questions. We had a discussion about how much money we thought it might be worth. We came up with a really big number and thought, that's probably not right. We did a little poking around and came up with, something, whatever. And so that's why we're suggesting that if the community feels really strongly they should, about this being open space, then the community should really think about how to try to raise the money. And I think we agreed that this is not a city, this should not be city funded. To buy this, maybe, but the city is going to have a lot of demands on its resources, and given the uniqueness of San Bruno Mountain, the biodiversity, et cetera, we're hoping that, and we understand that a deal was already made with Trust for Public Land to buy the two, what's the word I want? Canyons, sorry. the two canyons that are between the sort of central Brisbane area and the quarry. And so we're hoping that maybe some kind of a deal like that could be brokered, or that somebody would consider that. We think that's something people should really think about, because there are a lot of challenges to developing, and a developer would need probably a pretty significant increment of development to pay for all the costs they would have to bear. So again, that's why we think that there should be a conversation and a discussion. Some of these issues should be daylighted. People should not be making this just as an emotional decision about the butterflies, but really, what are the hard realities of this? And again, this gentleman here asked about the implications of county or city. The real implication is private property and private property rights, and what are we going to do about that? And if you take all value away from the site, then it's considered a reverse condemnation, and the city has to value. So you can't just zone it as a park and walk away from it. That's illegal. So that's really the challenge here. And we didn't get into a lot of the mechanics of it, but I think that's a discussion we think people should have. People should be educated. People should know what's possible, what isn't, what they should be working towards. If this is your goal and your vision is that it should really be an open space preserve, then somebody's got to come up with money to make that happen. So that was controversial, but Michelle.
Well, further controversy over that is, should the purchase pricing include the outstanding loans that were defaulted on and everything else, because that property was used and abused financially for the last developer who came in. So I don't feel that that's really fair.
Well, I think that would have to be negotiated. That's we're not making any deals right now. But again, that financial choice on the part of somebody who lost their money in some ways has to be part of whatever discussion is entered into with whatever entity thinks they might be willing to broker this deal. So.
It's a going concern. Forgetting about anything about the land, that's today a going concern, and it could be a going concern for 20, 25 years. Now, that might not make everyone happy, but it's a going concern, and the community has really two main choices they can look at. They can raise the money to find out how to buy the going concern, or they can come to terms with the people that own it and do something that's acceptable in development, where everyone isn't going to be happy, but someone's going to be a little happy, the other person's going to be a little happy. But it isn't going to be perfect, okay, because it's a privately owned piece of land, and really it isn't even in the city of Brisbane. Okay, so that's the fact of it, and we can be citizens that look at it realistically and say this is what we've got to do, or we can keep battling it, and the trucks will keep going up and down the road, and they'll keep taking aggregate out, and it'll keep operating. That's what's happening.
Other great, yes, ma'am.
I actually don't have a question. I just have a comment. I just want to say I am so appreciative of this event and of being a part of it. I love the vision that you folks have come up with for the area that would connect Brisbane Village and ultimately make the area between the ridge and the town much more cohesive. We'd all sort of be one little town. We'd have one area, and it would also help our little main street. We're a dying town, and we need to save it. And I know the quarry is a huge, huge issue, but I think if we take on too many things at one time, I think revitalizing our main town at this time, I think, is most important.
Thank you. Anybody else? We're now, I think, a half an hour past our closing time, so we're very appreciative for those of you who hung in. Oh, Mary, of course.
Thanks. Sorry, just to add a few seconds. In response to your comment about knitting the town together, that came up many times in the discussions, and Brisbane has got so many wonderful assets going for it. I grew up in a little town. I love little towns, and I mean, to have a tax base like this, I mean, you've got some great treasures. You've got some beautiful mountains and canyons and wild spaces and a charming little town and also a tax base. So the trick really is for you all to figure out a way effectively to come together and address that through a community process that's really going to build consensus effectively and not too slowly. I've seen this happen many times in my experience where towns have just dragged the process out and out and out, and you want to have a lot of community input, but you also want to be able to pull together and come up with a reasonable plan, and maybe that'll mean postponing some decisions until later, but, you know, just try to come together and figure out win-win solutions because you have so much going for you. But as we all found out in that nasty recession, how fast property values can go down, and so, you know, one of the things we have to keep it's like working with your nose to the grindstone, your eye on the ball, and your shoulder to the wheel all at once. And that's just the position we're all in. It's the real world. So, but there's a lot of smart people here who have already done a lot of creative thinking, and we think you're up to the task and wish you well. And it's really been a pleasure meeting all of you, if I can speak on behalf of the panel.
That was a great closing, Mary. Thank you very much, and thank you all. And